She was buried alive, pregnant, trembling, gasping beneath the muddy earth behind a quiet home in Oregon. No one saw, no one knew, until 6-year-old Theo, mute since his father's death, heard her. And when he did, he didn't scream, he dug, and whispered his first word in months. What followed was more than a rescue. It was a secret experiment, a bond beyond science, and a boy who found his voice, because a dying dog refused to give up. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And if you believe no soul should be buried and forgotten, hit that subscribe button. This story will stay with you. The wind moved gently through the pines of Silver Pine, Oregon, brushing the tops of suburban roofs and whistling through the backyards of homes lined up in quiet resignation. One such home sat modestly on the edge of town, a single-story, pale blue ranch-style house, with peeling shutters and a fenced backyard that gave way to forest. It was the kind of house that once whispered promise, now holding its breath under the weight of grief. Emily Gardner stood on the back porch, arms outstretched with a basket of wet laundry balanced against her hip. At 32, she carried herself like a woman who had learned to armor her softness. Tall and willowy, with wavy chestnut hair tied up in a loose bun, her eyes held the dull green of sea glass, as if they'd once shone brighter but had since weathered too many storms. The last of those storms had taken her husband, Adam. It had been nearly 10 months since the accident. Brakes that failed on a highway turn, a collision that shouldn't have been fatal, but was. Authorities had called it a tragic fluke. Emily, a night shift ER nurse used to the randomness of death, wasn't convinced. Something about the way the mechanic had mumbled during the inspection, the look on Adam's face days before. She hadn't let it go. But grief, she learned, was a lonely kind of fire. It burned in silence. Inside the house, quiet reigned like a ruler. Her son, Theo Gardner, had not spoken since the day they buried his father. 6 years old, pale as paper, with eyes too large for his small face, Theo moved through the world like a ghost child. He wasn't mute. His vocal cords worked fine, but his voice had been locked away somewhere behind his ribs, buried beneath trauma no mother could dig out. "Sweetheart," Emily called gently toward the open back door. "I'm going to hang this load. Stay close, okay?" There was no response, only the rustle of leaves and the flapping of a drying sheet. She sighed, pegging a towel on the line. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Her fingers stiffened around a damp sock when she realized the silence had changed. It was no longer peaceful. It was empty. "Theo!" she called, louder now. Still nothing. The basket crashed to the porch as she rushed inside the house. Kitchen, empty. Living room, empty. Bedroom, empty. She bolted out the front door and ran around the side of the house toward the woods. "Theo!" she screamed, heart hammering against her ribs. And then she heard it, a distant sound like scratching, digging. It came from beyond the tree line. She didn't hesitate. Thorns scratched her legs as she pushed through brush, stumbling over roots and branches. The sound grew louder, more frantic. And then, there he was. Theo knelt in a muddy clearing, covered in dirt, his small hands clawing at the ground like a desperate animal. His pajamas were soaked. His nails were torn and bleeding. He didn't even look up as she approached. Emily fell to her knees beside him. "Theo, what are you doing? Are you hurt?" But Theo didn't answer. He only kept digging, panting, trembling. She followed his hands, and then she saw it. Fur, mottled black and tan, muddied and matted. A paw, a shoulder, a body. Emily gasped. It was a dog, a German shepherd, half buried in wet earth, still breathing. The animal was large, but too still, as if she'd given up just short of death. Her ribs rose and fell in shallow gasps. Her eyes, glassy but aware, met Emily's, and then slowly turned to Theo. Emily reached out, fingers trembling, brushing wet soil from the dog's face. She felt the rapid, thready beat of a pulse under the jaw. "Oh, God," she murmured. The dog let out the faintest whimper, barely a whisper of pain. It was the sound of something clinging to life by will alone. Behind them, a voice called out, "Well, I'll be damned. Is that a dog under there?" Emily turned. It was Mrs. Evelyn Burrows, their elderly neighbor from across the street. In her late 60s, with silver curls tucked beneath a sun hat and a shawl wrapped tightly despite the heat, Mrs. Burrows was known around Silverpine for her lemon bars, her rigid opinions on yard maintenance, and her unexpected compassion. She waddled closer, frowning as she observed the scene. "That boy didn't say a word to me for months," she said quietly, "but something told him to come out here today." Emily didn't answer. She was trying not to cry. Mrs. Burrows knelt beside them. "Emily, sweetheart, that's not just coincidence." Emily felt Theo's hand gripping her sleeve. When she looked down, he was staring at the dog, tears falling silently down his cheeks. His lips moved, just barely. "She's hurting," he whispered. Emily froze. Mrs. Burrows gasped. It was the first thing he'd said in nearly a year. Later that evening, back inside the warm kitchen, Emily sat Theo on the counter, wrapping his hands with gauze. Mud was still in his hair, dirt under his fingernails. His clothes had been discarded in a pile, replaced with a soft blanket. The dog, no, she couldn't call her that anymore, lay motionless on a bed of towels in the laundry room. Emily had rinsed the worst of the dirt from her fur and checked for wounds. No blood. But deep scratches on the hind legs, ribs visible, and, was she pregnant? She pressed her hand against the dog's belly. Movement. Oh no. The front door creaked open without knocking. "Emily!" came a voice, rough but familiar. It was Dr. Reed Martinez, Silverpine's resident veterinarian. Mid-40s, bearded, broad-shouldered, and quiet-spoken. Reed was a former Army medic who'd opened a humble clinic after his discharge. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it was like a door opening after years of rust. Emily had called him in a panic, and he'd come without question. "She's critical," Emily said, voice shaking. "But she's alive." Reed knelt by the shepherd, inspecting the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the distant look in her eyes. "She's been through hell," he muttered, "and she's carrying." His fingers paused on the dog's neck. He found something embedded under the skin. A tag? No, a chip. "This is military grade," he murmured. Emily blinked. "Military?" Reed looked up, eyes dark. "I've seen these before. She wasn't just somebody's pet." And in that moment, as thunder cracked outside and the night fell like a curtain, Emily knew. This wasn't just about rescuing a dying dog. This was the beginning of something far bigger. And Theo? He stood quietly in the doorway, staring at the dog on the towels, eyes wide, lips moving again, this time inaudibly. Whatever he said, the shepherd blinked once, slowly. She saw him. And somehow, impossibly, he saw her back. The rain had thickened into a cold, unrelenting sheet by the time Emily and Theo reached the back porch. The sky was a swollen bruise above them, heavy with storm and silence. Emily hadn't even registered that the laundry still fluttered on the line, sodden and forgotten. All she could think about was the dog. No, Lila, and the way her eyes had looked into Theo's, like she already knew him. Inside the house, Theo sat silently on the tile floor, his knees tucked under his chin, watching the doorway of the laundry room where Lila lay on a nest of towels. His pajamas had been changed, his cuts cleaned, but his hands still twitched now and then, as if remembering the digging. The mud had crept into every line of his palms. Emily knelt beside him. She had just finished speaking with Dr. Reed, her hands still shaking from holding the phone. "He's coming," she whispered, brushing a curl from Theo's forehead. "Just hang in there." Theo didn't nod. He didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the laundry room. Emily followed it and saw Lila's paw twitch. A strangled sound escaped the dog. Not quite a whine, more like the broken rattle of something trying and failing to breathe without pain. Emily leapt to her feet and ran to her. Lila's legs kicked weakly against the towels. Her entire body began to convulse in small waves, her stomach contracting in rhythm. Panic fluttered through Emily's chest. "Oh no, she's going into labor," she muttered. She grabbed the flashlight from the counter and knelt by Lila, moving the light over her side. Blood had begun to darken the towel beneath her. Emily pressed her hand gently against Lila's abdomen. Tight. Rock hard. It wasn't time yet. Something was wrong. "Hang on, girl," Emily whispered. "Help's coming." She reached down, intending to shift Lila's position, when her fingers caught on something cold and hard near the dog's neck. She pushed aside matted fur, her hands sticky with mud, and froze. There was a chain. Not just a collar, but a length of rusted steel, tight, embedded, like it had been there far too long. A thick cord of braided wire coiled beneath it, biting into the flesh. Emily's stomach turned. What the hell? She reached for her coat and began using it to scrape mud away from the base of the chain. Bit by bit, the details emerged. The wire had been twisted around itself in deliberate knots. Whoever did this hadn't just abandoned her, they meant for her to die. As she reached for the last knot, her fingers brushed against something papery lodged between coils. She pinched it out, heart hammering, and held it up to the flashlight. It was a scrap of laminated paper, partially soaked, but the ink had held. R47NW. She read it aloud in a whisper. It meant nothing to her. But it wasn't random. Someone had placed it there. Someone had marked her. Thunder cracked just as the front door burst open. Dr. Reed strode in, jacket soaked through, stubble darker with rain. He carried a hard-sided medical case in one hand and a flashlight in the other. His eyes flicked instantly to the laundry room. "She's down?" he asked sharply. Emily nodded and stepped aside. Reed knelt without hesitation, his large frame oddly gentle as he set the case beside him and began his examination. Still breathing, just barely, pupils responsive, but low response to touch. "She's in pain." "She's pregnant," Emily said, voice still unsteady. Reed paused. "She shouldn't be delivering yet." "I think she's been tied up like this for days," Emily murmured. "Maybe more." Reed didn't reply right away. He worked quickly, snapping on gloves, checking pulse points, scanning Lila's belly. His movements were precise, learned, reflexes from a time he didn't talk about. The years in military triage had etched themselves into the way he moved. "She's got at least 5 pups in there," he said after a moment. "But there's no way she can deliver safely like this. We need to release the pressure on her abdomen. If we don't, she'll seize." Emily nodded and held out the bloodied coat. "I already started removing the chain." Reed took a pair of medical shears from his case and leaned closer. "Hold her head. If she jerks when I cut this, I don't want her thrashing." Emily knelt at Lila's head and gently placed her hand between the dog's ears. "It's okay, girl. You're not alone." She felt Theo creep beside her. His tiny fingers wrapped around Lila's paw, and the moment his hand touched hers, something shifted. Lila's eyes fluttered open, and for a breathless second, they glowed. Just a trick of the flashlight, Emily told herself. With a crunch of metal, Reed clipped the wire. Lila shuddered. A long, low moan escaped her, as if she'd been holding it in for years. Her body arched, then collapsed. Reed worked quickly to dress the wounds and check for circulation. "We'll need a portable oxygen unit. I'll bring one from the clinic. For now, this should keep her stable." He looked up, his face grim. Someone did this deliberately. This wasn't just neglect. This was execution. Emily nodded slowly, then handed him the scrap of paper. "Found this under the wire." Reed squinted at it. "Are 47 NW?" He turned it over, frowning. "Military-grade lamination, not something you get at an office store." "You think this is a tag?" Reed's jaw tightened. "I think she was marked." In the doorway, Mrs. Burroughs appeared again, her umbrella dripping and her expression unreadable. She was holding a thermos of tea with shaking hands. "I just came to check," she said softly, "but maybe I should leave." "No," Emily said quickly. "Please, stay." The older woman stepped into the kitchen, her footsteps soft. "I've lived next to that patch of forest for 35 years. I've never seen a child walk straight into it and find something that needed saving." She looked at Theo, who was now sitting beside Lila, eyes locked with hers in eerie stillness. "He felt her," Mrs. Burroughs whispered. "Didn't he?" Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. Because in that moment, Lila, half dead, barely breathing, slowly, achingly raised her paw and placed it on Theo's hand. And for the first time in what felt like eternity, the child smiled. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the town of Silverpine coated in fog, so thick it curled around fences and coiled across windows like something alive. Inside the Gardner home, silence hovered in the kitchen, dense and holy, broken only by the muffled, rhythmic hum of Emily's electric kettle and the distant sounds of new life beginning in the bathroom down the hall. Emily stood at the counter, hands cradling a chipped blue mug, not drinking. Her hair was matted with sleep and worry, her sweatshirt dusted with dried mud from the night before. She stared out the window into the mist, her eyes red, not from crying, but from holding too much in. From the hallway, a sound drifted, a soft grunt, the scratch of nails on porcelain, and a high-pitched whimper that tugged at the base of her spine. The bathroom door was half open. She set the mug down and walked slowly toward it, bare feet silent against the wood floor. The room smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, and something sharp, life blooming under strain. Dr. Reed knelt by the bathtub, sleeves rolled, face flushed. His rough hands, so used to stitching wounds in chaotic corners of the world, now moved with reverence as he guided a slick, wet puppy into a clean towel. Two more lay swaddled in cloth beside a space heater, humming low in the corner. "She's doing better than I expected," he said without looking up. "A little miracle, this one." Emily entered, crouching beside him. Lila was curled into the bathtub. Her large body trembled with exertion, but her eyes held calm now. They followed every movement of Theo, who sat cross-legged on a folded towel, watching her with quiet intensity. It had been hours since they brought her home, hours of watching, breathing, waiting. Theo had not left Lila's side once. "I think she's done," Reed murmured. "4 puppies, one small but strong." Emily reached out, brushing damp hair behind her ear, and noticed the glint of something caught under the lip of the tub. She leaned closer. It was a small rusted tag, metal, scratched and nearly unreadable, still tangled in the base of Lila's makeshift collar. With care, she unhooked it and turned it in her fingers beneath the overhead light. There, beneath the rust and grime, was one word: Lila. Emily exhaled. "She has a name," she said softly. "It's Lila." Theo, silent as ever, tilted his head. His lips pressed together, unreadable. Reed looked up from his work. "Dogs like this don't usually have tags. Not ones abandoned like that. Most times it's just a number, maybe a chip. But a name means someone loved her once." Emily ran her fingers along the etched letters again. "Or wanted her to be remembered." "Names are powerful," Reed said, almost to himself. "Especially for soldiers." She glanced at him. Reed straightened, wiping his hands. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. But that tag you found, R47, NW, it matches a code series I've seen before. From my time in Kandahar." Emily froze. "What kind of code?" "Experimental canine training units, specialized sensory mapping, neurological enhancements. Most didn't pass the field stages. They were too sensitive. Some shut down under pressure. Others snapped." He rubbed his temple. "But I remember the designation. Night Watch, NW." Emily turned slowly to look at Lila, now resting her head against the tub wall. One ear twitched as if she understood every word. "She doesn't seem violent," Emily whispered. "She's not. But that's what scared them. The ones who showed empathy, those were the ones they feared most." The bathroom fell quiet. Then a sudden, sharp squeak broke the stillness. Theo had leaned over the edge of the tub. One of the puppies, a runt, limp and unmoving, lay against Lila's belly. The others squirmed and nudged for warmth. But this one. Emily reached over, heart pounding. Its tiny chest did not rise. "No," she breathed. "No, no, not now." She scooped it up, hands trembling. Cold, still. Its mouth opened just slightly. Reed stepped forward, but Theo raised a hand. Tiny, pale, but firm. Emily hesitated, and then Theo leaned in close to the motionless pup. His lips parted. "Live," he whispered. Emily's breath caught in her chest. Reed stared. Theo's eyes shimmered. "Live," he repeated, barely audible. And then, like a flicker of light, there was movement. The puppy twitched. Once, then again. Its mouth opened, a wet cough, and then a gasp. Its tiny ribs lifted, fell, lifted again. Emily let out a sob. She pressed the puppy to her cheek, laughing through her tears. "Oh my God, Theo, you—" But Theo said nothing more. He only reached out and gently touched the pup's nose. It licked his finger. Lila let out a low, soft growl, not of warning, but of acknowledgement. Mrs. Burroughs appeared in the doorway, clutching a blanket. She was dressed in her morning housecoat, a pale lavender floral thing tied with too much tension at the waist. Her gray hair had been pinned up haphazardly, and her cheeks were wet. "I heard a cry," she said breathlessly, eyes darting toward the tub. "Is it—" Her gaze fell to the bundle in Emily's arms, and to Theo, who looked up at her, eyes bright, expression gentle. "He spoke," Emily said, voice cracking. "He spoke, Evelyn." The old woman staggered forward and sank to her knees beside them, covering her mouth. "Oh, sweet boy," she whispered, "you're coming back to us." Theo turned to her and smiled. Lila shifted in the tub, nudging one of her pups with her snout. Then she stilled. Reed leaned over, checking quickly, but then relaxed. "She's just exhausted. No more contractions. She's stable." He picked up the last pup, a pale-furred one with slightly darker ears. As he turned it in his hands, he froze. "Emily." "What is it?" Reed angled the pup toward the light. A white mark spread across the tiny dog's chest, a perfect 5-pointed star. Its eyes were open. "Impossible," Reed muttered. "They're not supposed to open this early." Mrs. Burroughs crossed herself. The pup blinked. Its eyes were cloudy, unfocused, but it looked toward Theo. And Theo stared back, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to see it. The morning after Lila's miraculous delivery came with a crisp chill, the kind that wrapped itself around the edges of windows and crept under doors. Silverpine woke slowly, fog still loitering between the pine trees, while birds chirped hesitantly, as if uncertain they were allowed to celebrate. Inside the Gardner home, warmth bloomed from within, a fragile sanctuary built on worn blankets, the scent of chamomile, and the gentle breaths of newborn puppies. Lila lay resting in the hallway, her body curled protectively around her litter, the star-marked pup nestled closest to her chest. Her fur, still rough with remnants of dried mud and scar tissue, somehow looked softer beneath the morning light. Theo sat beside her, sketching quietly in a small notebook with a dull pencil. Emily had never seen him this still and focused, his little brows furrowed in concentration, eyes flicking between the paper and the sleeping pups. Emily herself stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with uneven precision. Her sweatshirt hung off one shoulder, her hair hastily tied back. She hadn't slept, not really, but she felt awake in a way she hadn't since Adam died. There was purpose in her limbs again, direction. The knock at the door startled all of them. 3 short raps, no hesitation. Emily wiped her hands on a dish towel, glanced at Theo, he was still, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark overcoat, standing unnaturally straight. His build was average, but something in the way he carried himself suggested he was used to commanding attention. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back. A black leather binder rested under one arm. Emily opened the door a cautious inch. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, thin-lipped and polite. "Emily Gardner?" "Yes." He held up a badge. "Grant Keller. I represent the Oregon K-9 Tactical Division. I believe you're harboring one of our missing assets." She blinked. "Excuse me?" His smile didn't falter. "A German Shepherd, female, roughly 6 years old, marked as Lila on her embedded tag. That designation belongs to a unit under our registry. She was lost during a classified transportation transfer 3 months ago. We've been trying to recover her ever since." Emily tightened her grip on the doorframe. "She's not an asset. She nearly died in my yard. She's a living creature. She gave birth yesterday." "That's precisely why we need her returned immediately," Keller said smoothly, stepping forward but not crossing the threshold. "Her pups are of interest to the state." Emily's voice hardened. "I'm not handing her over." Grant's tone dipped. "Ma'am, with all due respect, refusal to return government property may be considered obstruction, or worse, illegal possession. If necessary, I can return with officers and a warrant." A voice rang out from behind them. "You'll have to go through me first." Emily turned to see a woman in uniform stepping through the garden gate. Her nameplate read J. Ames, and her auburn hair was tied in a severe ponytail under a Silverpine PD cap. She was in her late 30s, compact and lean, with eyes like stone and a jaw set permanently forward like she'd been born mid-argument. Grant turned, mildly amused. "Officer Ames?" "Detective Ames," she corrected, flashing her badge. "Emily called me when she found Lila. She's under local protective custody until further notice." Grant's smile soured, just slightly. "This is a federal matter." "Then bring your paperwork," Julia snapped. "But don't show up again without cause. You're trespassing." Emily stared. You knew to come?" Julia nodded. "I've been watching this town long enough to recognize a government tag when I see one. And Keller here, not just Oregon K9, used to be with Black Star, a private training firm that partnered with the feds. Their dogs didn't get homes. They got deployed." Grant's eyes darkened just for a second. "You'd know, wouldn't you?" Emily looked between them. Julia inhaled deeply. "I was in the program, K9 Division, 5 years ago. I washed out. Not because I failed the tests, but because I filed a report. My unit was pushing dogs past the breaking point, starvation tolerance, sound drills that lasted 12 hours straight. I fought it. They pushed me out." Keller adjusted his coat, voice dropping an octave. "Miss Gardner, this is your last chance to comply. If you obstruct recovery, your son may be considered at risk." Emily stepped in front of the door. "Get off my porch." He hesitated a moment longer, then nodded, turned, and walked away. The silence that followed his departure was thunderous. Julia shut the door. "He's not going to stop." Emily slumped against the frame. "Then we don't either." That afternoon, the air turned golden, and Emily finally allowed herself to sit. Theo was on the living room rug, Lila stretched nearby, watching him like a sentry. Emily handed him a sandwich, but he didn't take it. His eyes were on a photograph sticking out of the old bookshelf drawer, one of the last taken of their family before Adam's death. Theo pulled it free and stared. Emily was about to tell him to be gentle with it when his hand froze midair. His face went pale. He turned the photo toward her and pointed to the blurred background. A man stood there, just beyond the car's outline, not in focus, but the profile, the jacket, the slicked back hair. Emily leaned in. It was him. Grant Keller had been there, at the scene of the crash. Theo dropped the photo, and for the first time in days, he opened his mouth. "Mama," he whispered, "he was there." It was nearly midnight when the storm rolled in again, softer this time, like a whisper instead of a scream. Rain tapped against the windows with fingers of sound, as if the house itself were being questioned by something outside. Inside the Gardner home, lights were dimmed, heaters on low, and all things living curled against each other. Lila with her pups, Emily in the armchair with her knees drawn up, Theo asleep in the corner with a flashlight gripped tight in his hand like a sword. Dr. Reed sat hunched at the kitchen table, laptop open, wires coiled like snakes beside him. The room smelled faintly of coffee, bleach, and static. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that still bore ghost scars from old shrapnel wounds. One scar crossed his wrist in a perfect crescent. He never spoke of it, but it caught the light whenever he typed. He leaned closer to the scanner beside him. The device blinked red, then green, then flatlined. "Got it," he muttered. Emily stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, hair tangled with sleep. "Anything?" Reed motioned her over and pointed to the 3D scan on his laptop. A diagram of Lila's skull hovered on the screen, lines and dots lighting up the internal structure near the base of her left ear. "There's a chip," he said. "High-frequency passive emitter, not your average microchip. This one's coated with compressed data streams and GPS, most likely military grade." Emily blinked. "So they were tracking her?" "Not anymore," Reed said. "The battery's been dying for weeks, but it held more than location. I decrypted part of the data. It was buried behind some serious encoding, like someone wanted it hidden even from their own systems." He hit a key. The screen blinked again, then revealed a series of white letters on black. Project Nightwatch, R47NW, Neuro K9 Link Initiative, Tier 3 Testing. Emily stared. "What does that mean?" Reed leaned back, rubbing his temple. "It means Lila wasn't just trained to follow orders. She was designed to feel them. The Nightwatch program tried to engineer dogs with heightened empathy, neurally bonded to their handlers. Not through command, but through shared perception, emotional synchronization, tactical telepathy, if you believe in that sort of thing." Emily's throat tightened. So she wasn't just sensing Theo, she was connected to him. Before Reed could reply, Julia Ames barged in through the back door, her badge clipped askew and her jacket dripping rain. "I tracked the code," she said breathlessly, dropping a file on the table. "A 47NW isn't just a military project. It's funded by a private defense contractor, Cerberus Solutions. Black Ops, disavowed ties. Officially, it doesn't exist. She flipped open the folder. Inside were grainy photos of a remote facility in southern Oregon. Fences, floodlights, a watchtower shaped like a satellite dish. They specialized in non-lethal defense research. Night Watch was supposed to be shut down 2 years ago. Reed scoffed. Clearly someone kept it alive. Emily sat heavily in the chair beside him. So, Keller works for them? Julia nodded. Or worse, he owns the Oregon unit. He was a lead behavioral officer before the program was buried. He's got the authority to declare any Night Watch dog state property, including offspring. A cold breeze passed through the house then, unnatural. Emily looked toward the hallway where Lila lay. And then, snap. The lights flickered, the heater cut out, and in the silence that followed, there was movement. Outside, Julia reached for her holster. Get Theo! Emily was already running. She reached the hallway as the porch camera blinked off. Outside, shadows moved. 1, 2, 3 figures slipping through the trees. One carried a bolt cutter, another had a black duffel. The third moved faster, smaller, like he knew the layout of the house already. In Theo's room, the flashlight lay on the floor, still warm. The window was open. But Theo was gone. Emily's heart skipped, then galloped. Theo! A muffled bark came from the living room. She spun and saw him, standing barefoot on the rug, his pajamas soaked in rain. He looked like he'd walked straight out of a dream. I saw them, he whispered. Lila showed me, before they came. Emily scooped him up. You what? He pointed to his forehead. In here. I was asleep, and then I wasn't. I was her. I felt her heartbeat. I smelled the men. One stepped on broken glass. Another smelled like metal. Lila saw it, and she let me see it too. Lila growled softly from the bathroom. Her ears were flat, her pupils wide. She knew, Theo whispered. Suddenly there was a thud against the back door. Julia raised her weapon. Another crash, this time at the front. Reed hit the panic switch on the wall. We've got less than 30 seconds before the cops arrive. Emily looked at her son. Theo, how did you know to wake up? He turned to her slowly. Because she called me. She said, wake up, they're here. Not in words, just feeling. Reed swore under his breath. This connection, it's real, bi-directional. If Lila and Theo were trained under Night Watch, then the bond can pass both ways. Julia moved to the hallway. We hold them off, just until backup gets here. And that's when one of the windows shattered. A man dressed in black stepped through, face obscured by a mask, tranquilizer rifle in hand. He aimed. And Theo stepped between the barrel and the dog. Don't, he whispered. The man hesitated. Just long enough. Lila lunged, faster than anyone had seen her move since the birth. Her jaws snapped, catching the rifle and wrenching it away. The man crashed into the kitchen island, howling. Julia disarmed him in seconds. Sirens wailed in the distance. By the time backup arrived, the other 2 intruders had vanished into the woods. Emily sank to her knees, clutching Theo, and Theo whispered into her hair, she lets me see the future, just before it happens. Emily trembled, because for the first time since Adam's death, she believed in something impossible, and it was alive in her arms. The morning after the break-in, the world outside was soaked in silver fog and the scent of pine sap. The Gardner home stood quiet, its walls still humming from the chaos of the night before. Emily walked through the debris-strewn hallway barefoot, heart pounding with the aftershocks of adrenaline. A window had been boarded hastily with plywood. Julia was on the porch, pacing with her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Dr. Reed was bent over his laptop, face pale, lips tight, but all Emily could focus on was Theo. He sat cross-legged on the rug, eyes locked with one of the puppies, the 7th, the smallest, the one born last. Ansel. Unlike his siblings, Ansel had a peculiar look. His fur was lighter, almost pale gold with tufts of white at his ears, and a star-shaped patch on his chest that mirrored the marking on Lila. His eyes were a soft amber gray, intelligent, aware. He was barely 2 weeks old, but he already held his head like he had questions. And when his tiny paw touched Theo's fingers, the living room seemed to change. Light shimmered briefly between them, a distortion like heat waves off asphalt. and then an image appeared, faint, flickering, right behind Theo's shoulder. Emily gasped. It was the mountain road to Silverpine, the bend near Oak Ridge, and a black SUV, familiar and menacing, winding up the trail. When Theo blinked, the vision dissolved. He turned to her and said quietly, "They're coming. Soon." Emily dropped to her knees. "You saw it?" He nodded. So did Ansel. Lila growled softly from the hallway, ears perked. Her body was tense, though her pups continued to sleep nestled close. Julia stepped in through the door, tucking her phone into her jacket. "We need to leave, now." Emily stood, trying to steady her breath. "Go where?" "My family had a hunting lodge up on Crow's Spine Ridge," Julia said. "It's remote. No power grid, no signal towers. We'll be ghosts." Dr. Reed looked up from his screen. "I just confirmed something worse than we thought. The chip in Lila, it's not passive. It's active. It doesn't just transmit, it calls, sends out pings. We've been tracked." Julia swore under her breath. "How soon can you disable it?" Reed ran a hand through his hair. "Surgically? I'd need tools I don't have, but I can rig a signal jammer. Crude, short range, but it might buy us time." "Then we go," Emily said. As she packed, she kept glancing at Theo, who now sat with Ansel tucked inside his jacket. The bond between them was clear, more than warmth or trust. There was communication. She had stopped questioning the impossible. Lila remained calm through the packing, as if she knew. She stood when the carrier was ready, gently ushering her puppies one by one into the lined crate Reed had reinforced with blankets and foam. Julia drove the battered SUV, her movements tight and precise. Her eyes scanned the mirrors with the vigilance of someone who had once lived under suspicion for far too long. She didn't speak much, but during a brief gas station stop 2 towns over, she handed Emily a folder. Inside were documents from her time at the Oregon K-9 Academy, photocopies of field reports, memos, and one stark page with a red stamp. Subject hash, 47, Lila, failed trial, emotional interference, exhibits irrational empathy, non-compliant during simulated aggression scenarios, marked for recall and removal. Julia said softly, "They punished her for caring, for choosing not to hurt." Emily closed the folder and clutched it to her chest. That's why they want her back. By early afternoon, they reached the old cabin hidden in the folds of Crow's Spine Ridge. The place was built in the 70s, stone-based, metal-roofed, with weathered wood siding and moss creeping along the edges. It was secluded, nestled in a cradle of trees and shielded from the road by a sloped dirt trail. Inside, it smelled of cedar and cold ash. Julia lit the hearth, and Reed got to work jamming the signal. He mounted a copper coil antenna to the chimney, routed it through a hand-built shielded box, and watched the indicator blink from red to blue. That should stop them, for now. Later that evening, they gathered around the fire. Theo sat on the rug with Ansel in his lap, the other pups nearby. Lila rested near the door, ears perked at every distant howl. Emily brewed tea from pine needles and dried lemon rind. Julia checked her firearm, then opened a call. "This is Ames," she said. "Patch me through to Dr. Maya Chen." The line crackled. Maya Chen's voice was sharp, clear, and carried an undercurrent of warmth, sharpened by principle. "Julia, haven't heard from you since the deposition." Julia smiled faintly. "I need your help." Maya was in her early 40s, a neuroethicist specializing in the moral limits of animal cognition programs. Petite, with hair like silk ink and always dressed in muted tones, she had a reputation for exposing what governments would rather keep hidden. "Tell me it's not about Project Nightwatch," Maya said. "It's worse," Julia replied. That night, Theo didn't sleep. He sat upright, Ansel still in his lap, wide eyes glowing faintly from the fire's dying light. Emily dozed beside him, her arm draped protectively over his legs. Ansel shifted, turned his head, and for the first time made a sound. Not a bark, but something softer. A warble, like a note hummed through a glass flute. It vibrated the air. Theo blinked. The room shimmered again, and then he saw it. A cold hallway, steel walls, a man in a lab coat, and a cage, filled with puppies. And then Lila, screaming. Theo gasped awake. Lila snapped to attention and let out a low, guttural growl, not from fear, From memory, Emily sat up, startled. What is it? Theo looked at her. His voice shook. She remembers where she came from. Outside, deep in the woods below, a red blinking light cut briefly through the trees. Something had found them again. The wind tore through the trees like a chorus of ghosts, and Emily could barely hear Julia's shouted command over the howl of branches whipping against each other. Move! We have less than 5 minutes. The red light from the forest had not been alone. Moments later, they saw the glint of rifles. Men in tactical gear, boots thudding against the pine-strewn earth. Grant Keller was with them, his trench coat flaring like a war banner, jaw clenched, voice barking orders into a comlink. Lila growled low in her throat and nudged her crate of pups with her nose, urging Emily forward. Theo, clutching Ansel tight in his jacket, stumbled but kept pace. They had abandoned Julia's cabin, now compromised, and disappeared into the belly of Crow's Spine Forest. The terrain grew crueler, twisted roots, mud-slick slopes, ferns as tall as men, but Julia, ex-cadet of K-9 Recon, led with calm precision. Sweat clung to her neck beneath her braided hair, and her forest-green thermal jacket bore the scars of bramble and bark. "There's an old lava hollow ahead," she shouted. "If we make it there—" A shot cracked behind them. Tree bark exploded inches from Reed's shoulder. He cursed and nearly dropped the handheld jammer he'd been carrying since they fled. "They're too close," Emily gasped. "They know where we are," Reed muttered. "The signal jammer isn't enough anymore." But Lila didn't slow. She bounded ahead, leading the charge, not randomly, but with intent. Her legs, once weakened by injury and childbirth, now moved with impossible strength. It was as though something ancient had awakened in her. Theo stumbled again. Ansel let out a sudden high-pitched yelp, not in fear, but warning. Then, it happened. Light. Ansel glowed. It wasn't blinding, more like moonlight, soft and ethereal, radiating from the pup's chest, centered on the white star-shaped patch. The light pulsed once, then again, stronger, and suddenly the path before them shimmered, and then opened. Lila darted forward into what looked like solid rock, but vanished. Julia skidded to a stop and stared. "It's not rock," she whispered. "It's a hidden cave entrance, moss and shadow, camouflaged." Emily followed. Inside, the air grew cooler, damp. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like frozen teeth. The cave narrowed into a stone chamber that smelled of ancient earth and forgotten wind. The entrance vanished behind them as night swallowed the forest again. Outside, the armed men slowed. Grant approached the place where Lila had vanished, frowning. "They're here," he said, eyes scanning the terrain. "But we don't go further." "Sir?" one of his men asked. Then the illusions began. From the mist beyond the cave, dozens of glowing canine shapes emerged, phantoms of light, flickering like the shimmer of heat over flame. Each looked like Lila but different. Ghostly German shepherds, their eyes glowing like stars, their forms shifting through trees and fog like spirits. The men froze. One dropped his weapon. "Dogs?" the youngest whispered. "But they're not real." "They look real," another muttered, backing away. And then the pack lunged. Not with sound, not with force, but with the sheer weight of terror. Light bent, forest warped. One man screamed and ran, another followed. Within seconds, Grant's team had broken formation and retreated. Grant stood firm. His eyes scanned the woods, focusing on a single pup glowing faintly in the arms of a 6-year-old boy deeper in the cave. He smiled darkly. "So that's the one." Back inside the cave, the illusion faded. Ansel panted, tongue out, blinking with fatigue. His glow dimmed, and the chamber fell into stillness again. Emily fell to her knees, heart pounding. What did he just do?" Theo held Ansel gently. "He made them see what they're most afraid of," he said quietly. "Like Lila does, but bigger." Julia looked over at Reed. "Can that be explained?" "No," he said, awed. "Only believed." They settled for the night deeper into the chamber. Emily kept the pups close, Lila curled protectively around them. Julia stood guard at the mouth of the tunnel, rifle steady, and Reed worked with shaking hands to connect to his emergency satellite line. At midnight, Julia stepped into the circle of lantern light with a message. Her voice was soft but resolute. "I just spoke to Maya Chen. The federal government has opened an inquiry into Cerberus. She gave them everything we've found. The chip, the files, Lila's records. There's going to be an investigation. Will they come for us? Emily asked. Julia shrugged. They might, but we're not criminals anymore. Now we're witnesses. Later that night, while the others slept, Emily sat alone with a leather-bound notebook. She began to write, not because she expected to publish it, not for justice or memory, but for Theo. If something happened, if this ended badly, she wanted the truth to live somewhere. Day 12, she wrote. We left everything behind, but Lila is strong. Theo is stronger, and Ansel, he is something I do not yet understand, but I believe in. They say dogs are man's best friend. That's wrong. Dogs like Lila, they're more than friends. They're pieces of us we didn't know were missing. She closed the book, kissed her son's forehead, and curled against the cave wall. But as she drifted into uneasy sleep, Reed whispered from the shadows, There's something else. Emily opened her eyes. What? I scanned Ansel during the rest stop, Reed said. He's got a chip too, but not like Lila's. This one doesn't just track, it talks. It sends encoded emotional data, fear, comfort, trust, directly to the brainwaves of compatible humans. Emily went cold. I mean, Reed whispered, Ansel wasn't just born from a miracle. He is the next phase of Night Watch. The morning broke pale and gold over Crow's Spine Ridge, mist curling between the trees like breath from an ancient dream. Inside the cave, the night had given way to tension, softened only by fatigue. Emily held Theo close beneath the thin thermal blankets, their hearts still beating in tandem from the run, the glow, the revelations. Then came the roar of rotors, not hostile, not this time. A low thrum of twin helicopters echoed across the ridgeline. Julia had heard it first, standing at the edge of the cave's entrance like a sentinel. She didn't raise her weapon. For the first time in days, her stance relaxed. They're here, she said. Minutes later, the whirring blades became shadows on the canopy. 2 black and white FBI helicopters touched down in the clearing below. Doors opened. A small, composed figure stepped out, flanked by suited agents with the polished gravity of federal presence. Dr. Maya Chen. She wore a slate-gray trench, small silver glasses perched on her nose, hair swept back in a twist. No nonsense, measured, but not cold. There was a kind of gentleness in the way she carried her briefcase, as if it contained not just files, but hopes long buried under government silence. Behind her, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s stepped forward. Special Agent Harris, clean-shaven, gray at the temples, eyes like steel traps. He moved with quiet authority, the type of man who had spent too long watching too many secrets fester. Maya approached Julia first. We've confirmed everything. Cerberus has been operating outside its defense contract. They never declared the emotional cognition trials. That alone's enough for a federal breach. Emily stepped into the light with Theo at her side. She looked small, worn, yet unbreakable. Lila padded to her silently, head low, protective. Theo didn't hide anymore. He clutched Ansel in his arms, but he stood tall. And then, from the other chopper, they brought him down. Grant Keller. His wrists were cuffed, suit disheveled, eyes bloodshot but defiant. He sneered when he saw Emily. You don't understand what she is, he hissed. She's a weapon. You're hugging a bomb. Maya stepped between them calmly. No, Mr. Keller, you just failed to understand the difference between a tool and a soul. He was led away. Later that afternoon, as the legal teams processed the evidence Julia had hoarded over months, Maya met with the group inside the now cleared cave. She laid out the decision. Lila and her pups were no longer under claim by Cerberus or any military entity. Their status had been updated federally. Sentient, non-human entities with protected rights under the Animal Cognitive Defense Act. They will not be weapons, Maya said softly. They will be family. Ansel was the first exception. Due to his unique abilities, he was offered a new role, not experimentation, but therapy. A national PTSD program for children was in early development, and Maya personally petitioned that Ansel become its pilot companion. But only if Theo agreed. The boy knelt, petting the golden pup, whose pale fur shimmered in the sunlight that now streamed through the cave ceiling. He stays with me, Theo said first, then paused. Until the others need him, Maya smiled gently. We'll arrange for shared custody. That night, the cave was no longer a hiding place, but a cradle of closure. Emily wrote her final journal entry beside the fire. Theo sat cross-legged near her, reading aloud from a page he had written. Dear Dad, today I found the light. Her name is Lila. She helped me speak again. She helped me feel again. I don't know if heaven has dogs, but if it doesn't, you can borrow her when we visit. The words were raw, pure, healing. When the helicopters left the next morning, they did not leave behind shadows, but footprints. Proof that not everything created in a lab had to be cold. Some miracles wore fur. Back in Silverpine, Emily moved back into the modest house that once felt too quiet, too haunted. Now it was full. Paws on hardwood floors, laughter echoing in the kitchen, life reborn in small ways. Mrs. Burrows came by with casserole. Dr. Reed, newly appointed liaison for the Animal Ethics Board, promised to install a fenced garden for the pups. Julia, now re-honored and reinstated by the state's K-9 unit in an advisory role, visited every Friday. But the story didn't end with rest. It ended with revelation. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky into molten orange, Emily walked through the yard with Lila beside her. Theo and Ansel played in the grass, laughter ringing like wind chimes. Emily bent to stroke Lila's fur, and for a brief, dizzying moment, the world shifted. She saw, not imagined, not dreamed. A road, nighttime, rain, a car, hers, a shadow on the sidewalk, a figure, Grant Keller, and then, brakes failing. A scream, the sound of metal, and Lila, watching from the tree line. Not just watching, scent. Emily gasped, stepping back. Lila tilted her head, uncertain. You knew, Emily whispered. You were there. She realized it then, not with anger, but sorrowful understanding. Lila had not come into their lives by accident. She had been near from the beginning, part of the surveillance, part of the system. But something in her, some spark of soul, had broken free. She had chosen them, and they had chosen her back. Emily knelt and kissed the fur between Lila's ears. Thank you for remembering, for protecting us, even when they told you not to. The sun dipped lower, and as the first stars blinked awake, Lila rested her head against Emily's knee. She had never been a weapon. She had always been light. Sometimes, the ones we're meant to protect are the ones who end up saving us. Lila was never just a dog. She was a light buried in mud, a whisper of hope in the silence of grief, a reminder that healing often comes in the most unexpected forms. In a world full of noise, it was a child's silence and a mother's courage that uncovered the truth. May we all have the strength to listen, the heart to believe, and the faith to love, even when it's hard. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Don't forget to comment Amen if you believe every life matters, even the ones with paws. Subscribe for more stories like this, and may God bless every soul who watched till the end.